Hello, my name is 환산스님, and this is Sun Meditation in English. So, are we ready to meditate? Wonderful. Today's topic for contemplation and meditation is what do we do when we find ourselves fighting with the ones that we love? When we fight with the ones we love. Now, this problem is probably universally felt. I don't think there's anyone on this planet who hasn't had to deal with a conflict with their loved one at one time or another. Nonetheless, I think there are two basic kinds of fights that we get into with our loved ones. The first involves a genuine conflict of interest. We might be worrying about where to live or how to use the money that we have or how to divide labor in a household. Those kinds of things are understandable conflicts. No matter how much we love each other, these are issues that need to be sorted out. But then there are the kinds of fighting that we don't really know why we're fighting. We fight over very small things. And just to give you an example that I recently heard, there are these brothers that I know here in Korea. And they're originally from Jeju-do, and they moved up to Seoul, and they're living together. And they love each other, and they rely on each other, but they get into fights all the time. Most recently, they all went skiing together, and one of the brothers didn't bring the other brother's glove, and that occasioned some kind of chain reaction of emotion, so that the brother who actually did have a spare pair of gloves ended up not skiing at all. He was so upset. And they'll also get into fights over cooking kappa noodles. In Korea, that's called ramen, when they don't cook it right. So there are times when we fight over seemingly trivial things, and we don't exactly quite know why we're fighting. And the purpose of today's program is to investigate the sources of those kind of conflicts, both profound and seemingly trivial, with our loved ones, and then see what Buddhist teachings and practices have to offer in terms of dealing with those problems that pretty much probably all 7 billion human beings have to deal with. So why don't we first enter into meditation? So please assume a correct seated meditation posture. And as I always emphasize, please be meticulous in observing the details of the posture. So have the heel of one foot tucked in, the other foot on the opposite lap. Have your hands in proper position. Make sure your thumb tips are touching each other to create that nice rainbow arc. And then we just raise our shoulders to our ears, roll back and drop, tuck our chin in. Keep our eyes open, look straight ahead. Don't stare at any particular thing. Just look forward about 3 meters or 10 feet in front of us. And keep the tip of our tongue tucked against the roof of our mouth just behind the upper row of teeth. That's great. Just as an added detail today, I would like to suggest that if we're getting used to the posture, one thing that you might want to try to focus on is try to align the crown of your head with your perineum. Now, you're going to need to make very slight micro adjustments, but if you get it just right, you'll feel almost like something's clicking into place. And then your body will seem to naturally straighten out. Typically, when we begin meditation as beginners, it's a very muscular effort to hold our bodies upright. We feel like we're using all the muscles in our back and our shoulders, and it can be fatiguing for beginners. But when you get these adjustments right, when you focus on alignment rather than on muscular effort, and you get that alignment just right, what we often feel is almost like a surge of energy up our spinal column, and our upper body just seems to float up. And then very much less effort is required to maintain this position. And this is the secret of how professional meditation monks can meditate 8, 10, 12 hours a day without completely running themselves into the ground. There are secrets within our bodies and our minds that we discover in the course of meditation. So now why don't we enter into preparation breathing? So inhale through the nose and completely fill your chest. So inhale together, hold, and then exhale through the mouth. When I say I, what does the I refer to? Okay, and we say I 먹고 along with our exhalation within our minds. So why don't we try it out loud a few times? So inhale, hold, and then together, 이목고. Once again, inhale, hold, and then 이목고. When you're practicing alone, it actually is a good idea at the beginning of meditation for beginners to actually say it out loud and then transfer it into your mind. Obviously, when you're sitting together with other practitioners, you don't want to be doing it out loud. But if you're at home and practicing alone, it's a good way to focus yourself on 이목고 as you enter into meditation. So one more time, please. Inhale, hold, and then together, 이목고. And from now on, throughout the course of this program, we can all meditate together, continue this posture, this breathing, and continue to do 이목고 as we go through this program. Now, we've begun to receive calls and messages from our viewers, asking questions and giving us comments, which is very nice, and I'm very happy to hear about. And actually, one of our viewers asked a very important question. He or she stated that when they do the meditation, they feel their head get hot, and it feels like blood is rushing up to their head. And they're wondering if something's going on here. And actually, this is a very, very important thing. In Korean, this phenomenon is called 상기. That's S-A-N-G-K-I. And literally translated, that means elevated chi, elevated energy. And according to the traditional Asian view of the human body, what's happening is, because we're concentrating on the 이목고, the hwadu, in our heads, rather than keeping our attention in our lower belly, in our dantian, our energy center, the energy in our body is rising up to our heads, and that is potentially very dangerous. My teacher's teacher, Sun Master Songdam's teacher, Jeongang Snim, actually had a very, very severe case of this 상기 and almost died from it. We practice this breathing, this abdominal breathing, to prevent the occurrence of this ailment. Now, this kind of disturbance in our bodies is not acknowledged by Western science, but as anyone who has ever lived in a meditation hall can tell you, it's for real. And just because it's not diagnosed yet or understood yet doesn't mean it's not real. So we should take it very, very seriously. So to the viewer and viewers who are experiencing this is what I would like to tell you to remedy this. You really have to master this abdominal breathing. When you're doing the abdominal breathing, you're not just moving your belly back and forth. You're trying to keep your awareness in your lower abdomen. Keeping your awareness in your lower abdomen means being aware of everything that your lower abdomen is feeling as it moves back and forth. You want to focus your attention there. It's a kind of a principle in meditation that energy goes to the object of our attention. So if we put our attention in our heads, then all of our energy goes up into our mind. So the fact that you're feeling heat or circulation or pressure in your head region means that you are putting your attention there rather than putting it in your dantian where it belongs. So when you feel these disturbances in your head, that is an indication that you're not putting your attention where it belongs, and you should immediately go back down to your dantian, and you should do this meditation as if the 이목고 hwadu is physically emerging from your dantian. So I want to issue a very strong warning on this point because, as I said, my teacher's teacher suffered from it so greatly and came upon this abdominal breathing as a remedy to it. So we do this abdominal breathing to prevent those kind of diseases, so take it very, very seriously. And I would ask that you pay particular attention to performing all the aspects of meditation correctly, okay? Now, in the future, if any of us here or any of our viewers at home have questions like this, we definitely welcome them. So please call in to BTN, or you can write or come into the website and ask your questions there, and we will try to answer them as promptly as possible, okay? Now back to today's topic, which is what do we do when we find ourselves in conflict with the ones we love? Now, probably all sinims know what it's like to be in conflict with the ones that we love. Because that day comes when we have to announce to our families and our loved ones that we're going to shave our heads and go off and become monks. And this becomes a source of great pain and disappointment for our families. The prime example, of course, is my own teacher, Sun Master Songdam, who grew up in a very traditional Confucian household. He was considered the brightest of the children in the house, the one with the brightest future. And at the time that he met his own teacher and made his decision to become a monk, he was actually attending the most well-known and prestigious high school. In modern terms, it would be kind of like a private high school. But it was way back when, and he was attending the best high school in his entire home province. And his parents were very fully expecting him to go to a really good college, and not many people went to college back in those days, and have an amazing career and bring, honor and glory to their family. So it was a very big deal for him to have to turn his back on their expectations. And this is the story of almost all sinims. In my own personal case, my parents hoped that I would become a doctor or a lawyer, and raised me to be one, put me through a very expensive education only to have me throw it all aside. And this conflict for us sinims can go on for a very long time. I know the parents of sinims who come even now to tell their children, it's not too late to come out, you can still get a job, you can still get married. And these are sinims who are well in their 50s and who have been sinims for 20 or 30 years. So what we as sinims find out is that our families hope and expect us to be something that we're not. And we, for our part, hope for and expect an understanding and wholehearted acceptance of our path that they are unable to give or are unwilling to give or are just not ready to give. And so we find ourselves at odds with each other with this unbridgeable gap between us, and we too must ask ourselves, how do things like this happen between people who profess to love each other? Now, the interesting thing is that Buddhist teachings provide actually a very in-depth answer to that question. And that's what we're here to talk about today. From the perspective of Buddhist doctrine and teaching, what we commonly call love is actually a form of desire. And desire, according to Buddhist teachings, is a form of attachment. And emotional attachment occurs because unenlightened people, the unenlightened mind, doesn't know or understand the nature of its own existence. It doesn't really know who or what it really is. So to compensate, it creates a makeshift identity for itself, a so-called self-image. Literally in Korean, it's called a self-image, asang. It creates a self-image and attaches itself to that image, anchors itself to it, and it really begins to believe that it is its own self-image that it created. And then what happens after that is that the unenlightened mind becomes attached to anything and all things that bolster and confirm and expand this self-image that it claims to be. And these attachments extend to people as well. Now, what we have to understand is that the unenlightened mind is in a near constant state of unconscious anxiety. It is always trying to confirm and prove and validate to itself that it actually is its self-image. It actually is what it claims to be. And it is always afraid of being proven wrong. Because if it's proven wrong, then it feels like it will be lost at sea. It feels like it will no longer have a sense of who or what it is, where it is, or what it's supposed to do. So there is this anxiety that permeates the unenlightened mind. And when we see that from this point of view, it's this anxiety, in a certain sense, according to this teachings, that drives, let's say, lovers, makes them feel compelled to say "I love you" to each other so often. When we say "I love you" to each other, we're not giving and receiving information. When someone says to you "I love you," you don't say "you already said that." from the Buddhist point of view, these kinds of relationships are almost a kind of contractual arrangement where we agree to bolster each other's self-image, to validate to each other that we really are what we claim to be. Now, the important thing here to remember is that when we feel like this other person who's very important to us is not perceiving us and treating us as if we are our self-image, we get upset. We get very upset. We almost feel violated. And this is why we react so strongly and fight so hard over such apparently trivial issues like you always make me do the dishes, or couldn't you at least have called, or how can you speak to me like that? We almost feel like violence is being done to us when someone does not treat us in accordance with our beliefs about our own self-image. And so from the Buddhist point of view, unenlightened love is inherently selfish. We always want people to perceive us and treat us as if we are our self-image. And Buddhists are very adamant in saying that that type of emotional attachment and desire are not real love. It's a source of suffering. It is the source of suffering according to Buddhism. To the unenlightened mind, the self-image is the center of its reality and the center of its world, and to have it denied is one of the worst things that can possibly happen. And all of this is occurring because of our emotional attachment. We often think that emotional attachment, things like affection and desire, are positive, but actually, again, according to the most basic Buddhist teachings, they are a source of suffering. From the Buddhist perspective, attachment is a denial of reality. It is a denial of who and what the other person really is. It is, in fact, a form of rejection. When we look at our parents, our siblings, our friends, our spouses, our lovers, our children, and ask them to behave in a way that fits the image that we expect of them, we are implicitly rejecting who and what they really are. And that, finally, is why we fight with the ones we love, because we're asking them to be something that they're not. This is also why we have trouble with ourselves, because we are constantly compelling ourselves to be, again, something that we're not. So this is the Buddhist analysis of the roots of conflict between those who claim to love one another. Why don't we take a break, and when we get back, we'll see what kind of solutions Buddhist teachings and practices can offer us in resolving this universal problem that the entire human race faces. So we're back again. Now I ask you to continue to engage in meditation. Reconfirm our posture, our breathing, and our thinking. Continue to inhale, hold, and then exhale, and imoko. In our home temple of Yonghwasa in Incheon, when my teacher, Sun Master Songdam, comes to give his Dharma speeches, it's simply part of tradition, part of the greater Sun Buddhist tradition, that when everyone gathers to listen to his Dharma speeches, that they engage in meditation. And so when we're engaging in meditation, it's not like listening to a general lecture. You know, we just hold our hwadu, our imoko, do the breathing, and he emphasizes that it's not important whether we memorize what's being said or not said. The most important thing is to maintain the state of doubt that imoko produces. And he actually goes on to say that if there are two people and one of them has listened to his Dharma speech and memorized everything, and the other one has not memorized a single word and can't remember a single word, but has maintained imoko, the state of doubt, throughout the Dharma speech, it's actually the second one who understood the Dharma speech more. Now, I'm not going to claim here that the lectures that I give are on the same standing as the Dharma speeches that he gives, but the principle is the same. This is a guided meditation program, and while I do understand that there's information given in this program that might be helpful to our viewers, Nonetheless, while you're listening and watching the program, it's better to meditate. And I'll just let you know on a practical issue, if there are issues that are covered in this program that you want to come back to later or that you want to preserve in your memory, you can always go to the BTN website and simply watch the program over. So once again, back to our main topic. So what do Buddhist teachings and practices have to offer in terms of letting us resolve conflicts with our loved ones and on the whole get along with them better? And then once again, I'll say that there are a ton of books, DVDs, workshops, seminars, and therapeutic strategies that are designed to help people conduct healthy, loving relationships with the significant people in their lives. So I don't want to cover ground that's already really, really well covered out there in the media, in the bookstores, in the universities, So instead, I would like to focus on what specifically Sun Buddhist teachings and practices have to contribute to this important issue. And for the purposes of today's program, see, the problem with dealing with people who are very important to us is that emotions become very, very intense. And so I believe it's important to keep things simple when we're trying to learn teachings that we can apply directly in the lived moment, in our living relationships. So I would like to offer a few recommendations, and I'm going to try to keep them as simple as possible, even though they are rooted in Buddhist teachings. The first is the most obvious, the one that I always emphasize on this program, and that is try to meditate in the moment while it's happening. So if you're in some kind of heated moment with someone that you care very much about or is very, very important to you, even so in that moment, try to look to your posture, your breathing, and your hwadu, the imoko, and try to use that as an occasion for meditation. Now, I will warn you, we are all beginning meditators, and this is not easy. Getting into conflict with someone that you care very much about is one of the most upsetting things possible. So we cannot go in with unrealistic expectations. In many cases, people will say, just meditate and calm down, as if it's such an easy thing to do. Now, what I'll tell you truthfully is that as a beginning meditator, most likely, unless you're really, really skilled at meditation, most likely you'll feel like the meditation is not having an effect. But even so, if you try it out, you'll see that it takes the edge off. It cools things down a little bit. I won't claim that it's going to stop everything in its tracks, but it does make things better. You will say one less thing that you'll regret. You will do one less thing that you'll regret later. And whatever the other person is saying or doing will hurt you less if you try to engage meditation in the moment. It's very difficult, but if we keep practicing it in our most awkward, painful moments, we begin to develop a kind of meditative power. And it becomes directly applicable in the lives that we lead. So I give this recommendation with the warning, yes, it's extremely difficult, and you may feel like you're not getting anywhere, but if you do it often enough, you will see that it's better than not doing it. And the more often you do it, the more power you'll gain in terms of coming to terms with your emotions, your scattered thoughts, and your physically excited state of being. So this is something that Sun Master Songdam always says, but I think it's advice well worth taking. The angrier you are, the more upset you are, the more frightened you are, try to go into meditation. The second thing I would like to recommend is that when you find yourself in an ongoing conflict with someone very, very important to you, try to increase the number of hours or the amount of time that you spend in your seated meditation practice. So if you're sitting let's say 20 minutes once a day, see if you can sit twice a day, and see if you can sit more, like a half hour per session. If you're sitting an hour once a day, maybe in the morning, see if you can sit twice a day, morning and afternoon. Because the posture, the breathing, and the hwadu, the imoko hwadu, have a very powerful cleansing, purifying, and stable effect on us. Stabilizing effect. When we're in conflict with our loved ones, our minds are full of emotions and thoughts. And after a while, it's hard to orient ourselves among all those conflicting emotions and thoughts, especially if it's someone that we've known for a long time. There's going to be some deeply buried emotions coming out. So we want to be we want to have a system in place that's taking care of that as we go through the day. Otherwise, these emotions just accumulate, and then maybe we might do something foolish or reckless. So when we find ourselves deeply troubled by one of our significant relationships, definitely we want to be meditating more every day. And so that's the practical advice. It's hard to. That's one warning that I will give with this second piece of advice or recommendation, is that when we're that upset, we seek escape. We want to watch TV or eat something or read something or work or talk to our friends or complain about whatever's going on. We want distraction from all the pain that's being caused in our hearts. And the thing that's difficult about meditation, especially seated meditation, is that it brings us into direct contact with the very things that are troubling us. It forces us to face reality, because it's only in facing these thoughts and emotions that we can take care of them, that we can process them and move them along through meditation. So we may think, oh yes, I should be meditating more, and we may find, well, I'm actually meditating less. I'm sitting less. And there is a psychological reason for that. We're trying to avoid the pain that we're feeling. But by far the better way to approach it is to try to learn the patience and discipline necessary to face what's going on in our own hearts and try to get down for some more sitting time on our meditation mats. So that's two pieces of practical advice or recommendation that I've received directly from Sun Master Songdam, and that I would like to share with all of you, is meditate in the moment and do more seated meditation. Now, I would like to share two more teachings from Sun Buddhism. Once again, I'll try to summarize them as simply as possible, and I won't use Buddhist jargon, although I will explain the Buddhist argument behind each teaching. So the first teaching, and the third recommendation for today, is, I'm going to say this very simply, the problem is our self-image. The problem is not the other person. When we're upset, and we think of the other person, when we feel that the other person has done something wrong to us, and we imagine that person in our minds, we think about what's been said, what's been done, we think about all the things we should have said, we think about all the things we want to say later when we say that person again. When we think of that person in our minds, we have to remember that what's in our minds is an image. It's not that person. In a moment of emotion, we completely forget that. We think that when we think of that person, we're thinking of that person. We're not thinking of that person, we are thinking of our image of that person. So where does this image come from? It is a projection of our self-image that we talked about earlier. And because it's a projection of our self-image, when we think of that other person, we're only thinking of them in a way that's convenient to our self-image. If our self-image wants to play the role of victim, then we're going to think of that person as a very, very bad person. For example, the image in our minds will always reflect our self-image's agenda. So we cannot trust what's going on in our minds. And when we see that person, we cannot believe that that person standing in front of us is the same thing as the image that we've been thinking about all this time. This is a very, very important point, because often when we see our loved ones and we're angry or upset with them, we launch right at them thinking that they're exactly the person that we've been thinking about. And the only remedy to that, because our mind is deceiving us, because our mind is sort of playing games with us, the only remedy to that situation is the meditation. So that's why we meditate, to just keep letting this imagery flow by and not letting ourselves get hooked into it and be deceived into thinking that what's happening in our minds has anything to do with reality whatsoever. When we're in a state of emotion, there's usually a disconnect between what's in our heads and what's actually happening around us. In fact, the entire world around us, what we perceive as an external world that surrounds us, is actually considered a projection of our own unenlightened consciousness. And literally, it's the metaphor of a great mirror is used. a mirror that surrounds us and reflects to us back our own state of consciousness, and we mistake this mirror, the reflection in the mirror, for an independently existing external reality. Now that's a very, very profound metaphysical teaching, and probably it'll be difficult to think about it in any kind of social encounter. So the best way to think about this is the problem is our self-image. And once you know that, you can try to disengage from whatever complicated emotions that you're feeling toward the other person. The final teaching that I would like to share with you will be summed up in one word, and that is forgive. No matter what the situation is, forgive both the other and oneself. So why should we forgive? Now, every religious tradition, every major religious tradition in the world tells us to forgive. It's something very common. But there's actually a very logical reason within Buddhism. And it's not in the effort to become a better person. Because when you're really upset, many times you just want payback or you want to have an emotional tantrum. You're not interested in trying to be noble. So why, practically speaking, are we called upon to forgive? From the Buddhist perspective, all of our bad behavior, our negative ways of thinking, our negative emotions, our negative way of speaking, of acting and behaving, that's not really us. From the Buddhist perspective, we are Buddha. And all this negative stuff that we see coming out of us and coming out of people is our karma. So what is karma? Karma is the sum total of habitual, dysfunctional, negative habits of thought, emotion, speech, action, and behavior that we've accumulated over a lifetime because we're unenlightened, because we simply don't know what we are and where we are and what we're supposed to do. So we've accumulated all these bad habits, and these bad habits kick into play automatically when we're upset, when we're troubled. It's almost an automatic response. It's very, very hard to keep control of. So when we're upset, it's very easy to say the wrong thing, even though it's our mouths that say it. That's because of karma, because we have a habit of reacting a certain way under duress. So when we understand that, then we understand that whatever that person may have done to us, it wasn't that person. It was, that person is Buddha, just as I am Buddha. It was that person's bad karma reacting with my bad karma. And so it needs to be forgiven. Karma is a shadow cast by what we really are. It's the shadow of ourselves. And so the point within the Buddhist teachings is don't make a big deal out of a shadow. Now, so forgiveness doesn't mean, so you did this wrong thing and now I'm going to let it go because I'm such a great person. It's not about wrong and right. It's simply perceiving correctly that this is dysfunctional karmic activity that has taken on a life of its own. You see it for what it is, it's nothing at all, and so you put it down. It's recognition of the meaninglessness of it. So it's not, forgiveness is not an act of mercy, it's actually an act of intelligent perception. Once you know what it is, there's no longer any reason to be upset. Now in theory that sounds easy to do, but obviously in real life, when our emotions are completely permeating us, it's much harder to pull off. And once again, that's why we need the meditation. It's not enough to know this in our heads. If we want to apply these teachings in our lives, in the moment that life is happening, it's not enough to know it in our heads. We have to feel it and confirm it through the experience of meditation. So forgiveness is definitely the order of the day. And we forgive, no matter what we decide to do with the relationship, whether we choose to maintain it, change it, or let go of it, still we forgive. We put down all that emotional baggage, and in putting it down, we can renew the relationship, or we can bring it to an appropriate end. Now, I just want to qualify this recommendation of forgiveness, because there are cases of extreme abuse in the world, child abuse, rape, in the case, even torture. So I don't want to recommend to people who have suffered that level of abuse from another human being to force themselves to forgive when there's only rage and pain and sorrow in their hearts. So in cases where you need to look at your own pain and think, are you ready to forgive or not? And then the truth is you just may not be ready. And if that's the case, just meditate and don't try to force forgiveness. Forgiveness comes of itself. It's simply a recognition of the way things are. But we're not always ready for that. So once again, if you've really been through some kind of hell on earth with some person and you're not ready to forgive, then I would say don't try yet. Just wait until the day comes. And if the day never comes, then that's okay too. Okay, as long as you handle your life and your health and your well-being wisely. So those are the 4 recommendations that I've learned in the course of my tutelage under my teacher that I would like to recommend. The first is meditate in the moment, increase our seated meditation. The problem is our self-image, and finally, forgive. Now, at the beginning of this program, I mentioned that when Sinims decide to cut their hair and join the monastic order, that it's a source of great pain and disappointment for our families, and I experienced that too. But the last thing that I would like to share with you, based on my own, admittedly humble personal experience, is that with relationships, you just never know. You never know what's going to happen. And this is a personal story that I would now like to share. As I mentioned, my parents wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I ended up leaving the country and coming here to Korea to live as a monk for the last couple of decades. But several years ago, some time back, my father finally retired at the age of 65 from professional life. Now, my father actually immigrated to the United States as a foreign exchange student when he was a very young man, when he was in his early 20s. And he arrived in the United States, with 1 suitcase of clothing and about $200. And he worked all his life. He worked to get through college. He worked afterward. He climbed the corporate ladder. And throughout all of his adult life, his identity and his sense of self-worth was largely based on his professional status, on the kind of authority that he held and the kind of respect that he was able to win on his professional accomplishments and on his climb up the ladder. And so at the age of 65, for him to suddenly lose all of that caused him to feel great emptiness in his life. And he realized he was at a great turning point in his life, a kind of personal crisis. And for me, very surprisingly, what he decided to do was go on a meditation retreat for a week at a very famous temple called Songgwangsa here in Korea. And it's a very intensive meditation retreat program, but he came out here and he was by far the oldest participant. And they actually worried whether he would be able to complete it. So he was sitting there in meditation, sort of the grandfather among all these young people, and they had him meditating 7 or 8 hours a day, and he had never done that before. So he was in great pain and discomfort, and he thought, I'm not sure I can finish this. This is getting to be, quite difficult. And then he began to remember all the things that he had been through in his own life through the decades of coming into America, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, and just a country full of strangers, and all these struggles that he had to go through. And he realized he had gone through things that were so much harder. And as he thought of all the struggles of his own lifetime, he was filled with sorrow and a sense of emptiness and futility. And he thought, what did I do all this for? Suddenly it's all gone. And he profoundly felt the impermanence and insubstantiality of human life. And in that moment, he later told me, he finally understood why I had made the decisions and choices that I had made. So when he came back from this retreat, for the first time, he gave me his wholehearted blessing in terms of this path. And this was astonishing to me, because I had always seen my father as someone who's very, very practical and realistic and kind of a bottom line kind of guy, not given to flights of fancy and not prone to troubling himself over abstractions. And I was always kind of the dreamer in the family. So for him to suddenly turn around and validate, this spiritual path and to encourage me was really, really very, very surprising for me. And I realized then that you just really never know with a person. And so this isn't a specifically Buddhist teaching that I would like to share with you, but when we think of our relationships with our loved ones, it's not a static, fixed structure, in my own experience. It's more like a flowing river, full of change. Or maybe it's best described as a journey that we take together. And on this journey with our loved ones, we may become friends, we may become lovers, we will almost certainly become enemies at one time or another, and we may even become strangers at one time or another. But if we stay true and rely on these wisdom teachings, then I think at the very end of this journey, we will find each other. So that's the last thing that I would like to share with you. I am sure everyone here and all who are watching this are going through something with somebody in their life, and I ask you to retain hope and look to these teachings to give you strength. So that's it for today. Thank you once again to our studio audience members. Thank you to our viewers at home for participating. And once again, I close with the traditional Buddhist greeting, may we all attain the Buddha.